Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss one of the terms that Brexiteers use to scare people in voting for Brexit, the United States of Europe. So I'll be explaining where the term comes from and why it's neither been attempted nor even possible to occur. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So first of all, where does this term come from? Well, it's from Winston Churchill in the years following the end of the Second World War, during speeches where he was imploring the great powers of Europe to unite so that war could be a thing of the past on the continent. It's hard to imagine now, where most of us in the EU take for granted peace in our own lands, but European powers had been at war with one another for most of the previous millennium. The first half of the 20th century had seen two of the bloodiest. With increased mechanisation of war, I would also imagine that the spectre of atomic warfare that came at the end of the Second World War was also a very sobering moment. Europe was crying out for a lasting peace, not for a generation this time, but for all generations, and Churchill was at the forefront of that appeal. He made a speech where he described a sort of United States of Europe as a way to achieve that peace. Over time, the things he'd called for came to fruition. The Treaty of Rome and the European Court of Human Rights in particular made a real vision of a European community that was so dependent on one another and agreed to common standards of human treatment that war should be impossible between them. Now, of course, there have been instances of separatist-related conflict in both the British Isles and Spain, so I know not everyone in these nations has seen peace in their own lands, but at least war between the nations did stop. But now, in an all too familiar example of Brexiteer doublespeak, the very people who say they admire Churchill, that he's this greatest hero in British history, say that his ideas of a united Europe and European courts are damaging to Britain. They even try and sow fear about another of Churchill's wishes, a joint European army, even though NATO is really just that anyway. But what the Brexiteers mean by United States of Europe is not what Churchill meant, nor even based on what could ever be. What the Brexiteers are trying to suggest is that the EU wants to make Europe like the United States of America, where each individual country is just like one of the states of America, where it's all held together by a federal government which has jurisdiction over various matters. They can't say that's what's happening now, because even to the least informed, it clearly isn't the case. So instead they threaten it. They even say that it's already in the legislation and coming online in the next year or so. Depending on who you ask, we'd be sucked into this United States of Europe in either 2020 or 2021 or even 2022, according to the Lisbon Treaty, despite the treaty having no such provisions coming online in those years or ever. Of course, there's no agreement on when these measures come online or even what they are exactly, because they don't exist. It's a bit like the disagreement on how many virgins in paradise you get if you blow yourself to kingdom come on the tube. Brexiteers were trying to convince people that we'd be slowly losing all of our current rights and having to adopt various measures, and it was all written down in the Lisbon Treaty. We'd have to adopt the euro, Schengen gets rolled out everywhere, we'd lose our special vetoes. Some even said that we'd be losing control of the fishing and agricultural policy that other Brexiteers said we have no control over anyway. Well, I suppose when you're making things up, you're bound to contradict yourselves now and then. But none of it was real. That didn't matter though, because they knew their supporters were not the well-educated who would read it for themselves. Fundamentally, what the Brexiteers convinced their supporters of was that individual states within the EU would no longer exist, that would become one giant country with a sort of electoral college system like the USA. But that is to inherently fail to understand how the EU works on the most basic level. Decisions for the European Council are not always made on the normal collective democratic sense. There's no majority voting when it comes to major constitutional changes. A single member state can say no. Such matters, in other words, either everyone agrees or the status quo is preserved. For example, the EU has recently agreed a trade deal with the largest economies in South America. Previously, one reason why this had not succeeded is because Ireland exercised its veto on a deal that looked to put them at a disadvantage. Similarly, even if we tie Boris Johnson in a sack and send a different Prime Minister to seek another extension to Article 50, if just one member state says no, then no it is. Essentially, anything that is considered politically sensitive has to be voted by a unanimous decision in the EU, with other policies being a qualified majority. This requirement for unanimity is, in certain areas, actually includes tax policy. So much has been made of the fact that the real fury of Brexit in the UK has been driven by a desire amongst the dishonest portion of the wealthy elite to prevent the EU's new tax avoidance laws applying to them. However, this isn't a simple case of the EU forcing something onto the UK. The UK voted in favour of it as well, as we have voted in favour of 98% of EU laws. In fact, for all the measures required for the members of the EU to give up their sovereignty and form a superstate, there would have to be a unanimous decision. The UK would just vote no on them and that would be it. In fact, how insular do you have to be to even believe that other European nations want this? Who seriously believes that France would give up its sovereignty for this? Or Germany? Or Italy? Or, well, anyone? To believe it, you'd have to believe that other nations don't have their own sense of national identity. Frankly, the nation with the least sense of self has to be the UK. It's easily the most fractured member state in the EU. But the lie worked. Along with the others, it played on the tribal nature of our psyche to mistrust others not of our tribe, and they knew that the bulk of the population never checked facts. Coupled with the Facebook campaign that allowed them to target people with this misinformation, making it appear that the same thing was coming from multiple independent and reputable sources, and enough people came to accept it as fact. And just like that, we're back onto Cambridge Analytica. Incidentally, if you haven't seen The Great Hack on Netflix, I'd give it a view. But there you have it, taking the words of a British Prime Minister who heralded the vehicle through which the major powers of Europe achieved an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity, to turn them into a weapon against the great project that has given us so much, twisting his words to make a trap for fools, as Kipling noted. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details, and until next time, I'll see you later.